Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wired's live living room sessions. This is the first of a series of future-focused webinars where we'll be discussing regenerative agriculture, climate change mitigation and resilience, building biodiversity, renewable energy, amongst a few other things. Joining us each session will be a variety of local and international thought leaders. My name is Jenn. I'm from the Caribbean Permaculture Research Institute, that's CPRI Barbados, and we are happy to be partnering with Wired Institute for Regenerative Research, Education and Design. The series is powered by the IDB. Today, we will be focusing on the topic of permaculture. Our title is Permaculture Will Change Our Future, Why You Need It, and Where to Start. To lead us in our discussion today, we have Erle Naronha from Wasamaki Ecosystems in Trinidad. I will let Erle do his own introduction. So Erle, thank you for joining us. And how are you today?
I'm great, Jen. Thank you for having me on the webinar.
How's everything going in Trinidad? And if you can give us a brief intro about yourself, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So, well, everything's great in Trinidad right now. It's really hot. Mm-hmm. We're in lockdown, just like Barbados. So I'm on my farm.
Yeah.
And just a little bit of background about myself is that I've been practicing permaculture on my site for the last 20 years here in Trinidad. I'm originally from Kenya. I lived there until I was 19, and then I lived in Canada for another 10 years, and then I've been in Trinidad for the balance. So I've lived in different kind of environments. And for the last 10 years, I've been teaching permaculture and designing sites so that I've worked on many of the different Caribbean islands. And it's been a challenging experience, an interesting experience. And at that same time, I've also been running my farm. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Perfect. I bet it has been challenging. So I think one of the first things that our listeners will want to hear about is a bit about permaculture. So I get asked this question every day, almost on social media through our CPRI platforms: is what exactly is permaculture? What's the definition of it? Where did it begin? Can you give us a bit of background information on it?
So permaculture started ago in Australia. The people that came up with the concept of permaculture, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And Bill Mollison spent a lot of time in indigenous communities, seeing how they interacted with their environment and how they kind of lived in balance with the environment, and how they grew their food and how they lived in balance and how they didn't destroy the environment around them. And then he took that information and he created this design system based around permaculture. So permaculture is really a design system that comes from two words, permanent and agriculture. Mm-hmm. So I was talking about design systems that are permanent agricultural systems so that as you practice agriculture, you don't destroy the environment that you're in. Mm-hmm. And right. Those are the types of sites that will be sustainable. And in his case, he was thinking of sustainable where he was just trying to maintain what is there, but now permaculture has actually become regenerative. We've kind of done so much damage around us that we need to do more than just be sustainable. We have to start regenerating places. Mm-hmm, I love permaculture is one of those design tools out there that can help you do that.
Yeah, so moving from sustainable to regenerative.
So
definitely something that we're looking to talk about in the future in this conversation and in our series as well. Sorry to cut you off. Did you have something else to say, Erle?
Nope, no, go ahead.
Okay. So thanks for that. I mean, it's so what you really have said is that permaculture is a meld of two things, permanent and agriculture. And what we're looking at is looking at how people did it in the past, bringing that forward into the future and creating a regenerative model while we're at it. So I think what we'd like to see is a bit of how you're doing it there in Trinidad. Could you give us a bit more information about how you're using the permaculture principles that you mentioned? So I believe there's 12 of them. There's 12 different permaculture principles. How are you using those? What have you put in place on your farm? And a bit of background information about how you're undergoing things there in Trinidad.
So my farm is a 30-acre site. It was originally a citrus estate. When we initially took it over, it was one of those sites that was like any other agricultural estate. It was heavily pesticided, heavily herbicided. Lots of fertilizer was being used, and there was no diversity on the site. It was just pretty much a citrus tree every 20 feet. So over the last 20 years, we've taken it out of that model because there was really no money in staying in citrus at that point. And we've turned it into more of a ecosystem where we do many different things on our site. We started by harvesting water, and that's by putting in a lot of ponds in different areas, controlling how water flows across our site. Then we started food. We started planting trees. The biodiversity started returning to our site, and then we got into many different other smaller projects that together have kept us above water for the last 20 years. So that
Perfect.
we do flowers, we do
photos, don't you, of your site, and some things you can show us, so we can have a bit of a virtual tour while we're talking about your farm. So maybe if we can get our first photo of Erle's property up. There we go. Look at how lovely it is.
Sure. So yes, I'll just quickly walk you through some of the photos that I have over there. So this is what Wasamac Ecosystems looks like. It's a 30-acre site. As you can see everywhere around me, pretty much all the forest is gone. The patch of forest that you're staring at is what I've planted over the last 20 years. If you saw this picture 20 years ago, it would have looked very much like what everything else looks around me.
Like the outline. Yeah.
Like I said, most of the forest is gone, and there's a lot of housing coming up around me now, so that there's a lot of bulldozing, a lot of the rivers are getting filled in, and we're kind of the last little green space that's there. The next picture.
Oh, lovely.
So this is, like we said in the intro, it's kind of an intergenerational farm. So I've been running it together with my daughter and my mom. So my mom is originally from India, from a place called Goa, and she comes with a lot of knowledge of growing stuff in a climate that's very similar to Trinidad, but in a way quite different from Trinidad. So she's been very valuable in teaching us a lot of how we can use a lot of what we're growing, as well as different ways of using it. There's 20 ways of using things, and then there's the ways that she's learned. So it's been an interesting experience.
That's so important.
And then my daughter also runs her business over here, and she's taken permaculture design courses with us. And she's hopefully who I will be handing over stuff to in the next little while.
Perfect. I love
so that we can
It's the way everybody should be doing it.
Yeah, so that's just a little bit about it. It's very valuable living in an intergenerational type family, because there's so much information that can be shared. But sometimes when you're just living in one generation, you kind of lose those connections with the information that's out there.
And everyone can be making use of intergenerational, even if you don't have it within your own family. The community is a very good resource for intergenerational knowledge.
All over the world, knowledge is being lost because we don't listen to what a lot of the elders have to say anymore. And a lot of the knowledge that they have of how you interact with the environment sustainably or even regeneratively is being lost because we tend to keep them out of our lives in a way. And that's not everybody, but the vast majority of the world is heading that direction. And that's something that we kind of need to slow down.
Absolutely.
Or reverse.
Listen to your grannies.
Yes. The next picture.
Perfect.
So yes, our main income on our farm is cut flowers. We grow many different types of heliconias and ginger lilies. Permaculture is not just about growing food. It's about how you can have a sustainable lifestyle on your site. So it doesn't mean that you only have to grow food. We do a lot of art so that you can see that behind those flowers is actually from, which is dirt, clay, sand, grass, and then we have an artist that's resident with us that's great at doing all these projects. So
Beautiful.
permaculture is not just about growing food, it's about a lot of other things as well. Go to the next picture. Next picture. Okay, so a huge part of permaculture is really about saving local varieties of seeds, saving local varieties of plants, which are adapted to the conditions that they're in, instead of having all your stuff come from away. Because right now, very few people save seeds, so that if you need seeds, you have to go to an agricultural shop and buy seeds. Those seeds have come from many different parts of the world. Some of them are not adapted to the conditions that we have. So this is just a picture of a purple yam that we have that we collected from a farmer that had been conserving it for a long time. And we have many examples of this on our farm as well. A lot of indigenous knowledge is kept in food. And by having that food and using it regularly, you can kind of conserve that indigenous knowledge as well.
Yeah, so
Next
important.
picture. So yes, this is a picture of all the different mushrooms that grow on my farm. That's one of our newest projects. Is very little is known about Trinidad mushrooms and even Caribbean mushrooms. Some are edible, some are hallucinogenic, some are very poisonous. So we're slowly starting to catalog them, figure out how to identify them. Funguses and mushrooms play a huge role in keeping your soil healthy. And that's why we're trying to push the whole fungus aspect, is that to grow good food, you need living soil. And living soil is created by funguses breaking down so much in the environment and giving it back to us and keeping our place clean. So yes, this is just a picture of all the different
collected on your farm, are they, Erle?
Yes, they've all been collected on my farm. They pop up during the rainy season. We leave logs all through the forest that we've created now, and we're always out there observing.
Excellent. Are these for production, or are you producing your mushrooms and selling them?
We're experimenting with producing mushrooms right now. We're still learning about it. We're hoping that will become one of our revenue streams on the farm. Right now, it's just about identifying them and figuring out which one's edible. And we've started experimenting with some of the local oyster mushrooms. The next picture is cocoa. Trinidad is one of the centers for diversity of cocoa. A lot of all the cocoa varieties from the world are kept in Trinidad. They're housed here at one of the institutes, and we have access to a lot of different cocoa varieties. And these are some of the cocoa pods that we collected that had specific flavors, specific tastes, that we're now seeding into the systems that we're creating on our farm to keep a lot of these varieties in use.
So what you're doing here is you're just tasting the different varieties that you have already on your farm to choose which seeds you would then grow more trees from. Is that correct?
Yes. So these, I actually don't have any cocoa on my farm until last month, when we actually got these pods and started planting them. My soil on my farm has been quite terrible, and I've slowly been working on it for the last 20 years. And we think we've reached a stage now that we can introduce cocoa. So I got these pods from one of my friends that has quite a successful cocoa estate. And he picked all of these for the flavors that he liked and the taste that he liked. And then we were tasting them and seeing which ones we liked. And then we took those seeds and we've put them into the systems that we're creating now.
Amazing. How many different varieties did you plant?
So we have 8 different pods there. So it's 8 different varieties that we started with. And there are hundreds and hundreds of different varieties out there. So that this is just the start.
Perfect. Show us some more of what's going on at your farm.
Next picture.
This is something that's very interesting. We've run a few workshops at CPRI at Walker's Reserve as well, and put a few natural building things in place. So Erle, tell us what's going on here in this photo.
So part of the whole permaculture ethos is really making use of whatever is in your environment to meet your food needs, your housing needs, your energy needs, where you recycle your waste. So this is where we're mixing the cob. So it's a mixture of clay, vetiver grass or cuscus grass, and sand. We've experimented with different mixes, and this is the mix that we use, so that we're actually mixing it with our feet on a tarpaulin, and then every so often we pull the top together and we mix it again, and then we use this to build bricks, earthen bricks that we then use for many different projects on the farm. And during this lockdown, because we have had all the resources on site, we can keep working away on our projects without having to rely on going to hardware or anything like that, which is great. So that's part of what permaculture is, trying to be as self-sufficient as possible.
Absolutely.
Next picture. So again, we have slowly been relearning a lot of the techniques with working with the earth, because a lot of Trinidad has gone into concrete, really. A lot of this indigenous knowledge is disappearing, and part of what we're trying to keep going on our farm is using earth bricks, using earth plasters, teaching earth brick workshops, teaching about plastering. And this is just a picture of one of the interns that came through our site. He's from Barbados, and just him learning how to use earth plasters. And this was one of the kitchens. This was the main kitchen that we're building. We're building our kitchen counter.
Mm-hmm.
This is our composting toilet. So we actually compost human waste instead of sending it into a septic system. There's a lot of information out there on how you can safely do that. This is our composting toilet. There is a barrel in the lower chamber that we collect human manure in and mix it with sawdust, and then we let it compost for a year, and then we recompost it, and then we put it out around our tree crops. There's a lot of information out there on how you can do it safely. We've been doing it for the last 6 or 7 years on our site. And again, it's a valuable resource that people normally just flush down the drain. Next picture. So part of permaculture is also about encouraging art form, beauty. This is one of the other composting toilets that we built. And this is Celine on the extreme right, who's our artist that lives on site. And this was one of the projects she was working on by reusing glass bottles, all the little spots on the snake, glass bottles, and then the whole wall again is done from earth. Everything pretty much from our site.
Natural materials from your site, including recycled materials, and building a wall using those two items. Is that correct? And then you're using timber.
Yes, so we use. Yeah, so all the timber is teak that we've been growing on our farm, and we've been thinning out from the new forest that we're creating. And a lot of that teak is usable for projects like this, so that we've been using our own teak, we've been using our own clay, we've been using our own grass. And then waste that we've been collecting from other places like glass bottles is what's also been incorporated into this.
Right, and you mentioned earlier about a closed loop system. So this is looking like the whole shebang to me, where you're using things that you have on site, you're recycling waste that would have otherwise gone out, and you're reusing your human manure too.
So yes, so we are pretty much a closed loop system, or we're trying to be as much as possible. Yeah. And in situations like the pandemic that we're in now, where everyone gets locked in, it does become an issue, because if someone didn't come and collect your waste every day, what would you do with it? Would it just pile up? If you produce less waste, you have less things to do with, or if you can recycle most of your waste. So in permaculture, we have a saying that waste is something you do, not something you create. And again, it is by being imaginative with wastes that are out there, you can actually turn them into resources. Next picture. Yes, so this is, I think, the last picture that we have, and it's really about community, that we at Wasamaki are trying to create this little community that we have. We run internship programs so that some of the people at the table over there are some of our interns and some are our core team. No one over there is above 30, apart from my dad, right in the top corner. And it's really about inspiring the youth. And a lot of youth are kind of disenfranchised with the current systems that are out there. And we are just showing them other options of what's available. And part of us being community is always trying to have our meals together as much as possible. having local food that we grow on the farm, and then sharing it in meals that we harvest the produce and then eat it together is one of the most satisfying things that you can have on a site like this.
Right? That was an amazing tour. Thank you, Erle.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to show Wasamaki.
Pardon me?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to show Wasamaki. Go ahead.
Absolutely. It's always so interesting to see what everybody's doing all around the world. There's lots of permaculture sites all around the world, but to see one that is specific to our region and to see all the different things that you're doing there. Now, we are emulating some of that in our site at Walker's Reserve that CPRI is building at the moment. We run workshops and internships and things like that, some in partnership with Wired as well as with Wasamaki. And it's really just aspiring to be, as you said, the closed loop system and creating that regenerative system where we are helping the earth as well as the communities. So building community is one of the biggest things that CPRI Barbados aspires to do. If anybody is just joining us right now, we are live with Erle Rahman Noronha. He is from Wasamaki Ecosystems Permaculture site in Trinidad. Our topic today is permaculture will change our future. If you have any questions for Erle, please type them into the discussion area below the video that you're watching on Facebook. We are taking live questions from the audience fairly soon. Oh, we do have a live question right now from Sanjean. Hi, Sanjean. Oh, no, that one disappeared. We have one from Christina Fuller coming in. What ratio can you recommend to use for the earth or cob bricks? What is the longevity of the bricks? That's an excellent question. So we've run a few
Natural building.
There we go. Thank you, Erle. Natural building workshops at CPRI, and we have a few structures in place that people can come and see once we can get out and do things again. But Erle, what do you recommend for the mix?
So each clay is different, and the gravel and sand that you work with again is different on different sites. So natural building workshop, we actually teach people how to test their own clays and their own sands and try different ratios. So the mix that we use on our farm is like 1 part clay and 2 parts sand and 1 part grass. But again, it depends on the type of clay and the type of sand that you have, that it could be 1-to-1, it could be 3-to-1. You have to run experiments and see how that works. The clay bricks can last a long time, from what I understand. We've had structures that we've put up with our clay bricks for the last 5 or 6 years, and they're still standing fine. We don't fire our bricks, so they just dried in the
air dried
sun. Yeah. And we just dry them in the sun, and we don't actually we don't put them in a furnace to turn them into ceramic. As long as they stay dry, they're perfectly fine, and we don't use them for load-bearing type work. We actually build frames that we put them into. So they're more to fill space, and that you can do for all those load-bearing activities, and those you need certain mixes, and that's something that you have to research for your own site or your own laws and regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 3 structures in place. The most recent one that we built was during our last PDC at Walker's Reserve. So at Wired's Walker's Reserve project, we run a PDC, which is a permaculture design course taught by Erle in conjunction with some other people, other experts in the area. The last one that we ran was actually in November last year, and we're looking forward to another one at the end of the year this year. If anybody's interested, stay tuned. We will have more information about that towards a little bit further into the summer. So the last one that we built was forgive me if I forget what the terminology was, the small fire, what was it called, Erle? Where we
rocket stove.
PDC, and
rocket stove.
Rocket stove, I apologize. So we built a small rocket stove, and it was pretty much the highlight of the whole course for most of the participants. The rocket stove is a really simple concept, and we built it purely out of bricks that were created from the elements that we found on site. It was a really amazing experience. So we actually have another question coming in from Keisha regarding what were your challenges in planting at Walker's Reserve in sandy soil? So our CPRI site out at Walker's Reserve is a permaculture site as well, but the soil is completely sand. So Erle can speak to how that was challenging and how you overcame it.
Right. So Walker's Reserve was one of the projects that I've consulted on, and it's a sand mine that's reaching the end of its life. And I was brought in as part of the regeneration team to help bring life back into the quarry. So we had the sand quarry that is pretty much either sand that's left over from the mining, that's dirty, that couldn't be sold, or just areas that were extremely clay where the sand had been removed. So in both those situations, we had to find ways of bringing those soils back to life. And how we did that was by planting a certain mix of plants, putting a certain amount of compost or topsoil onto the site just to get it going, and then planting nitrogen fixing plants, plants like cuscus that have very deep roots and produce a lot of biomass. And every so often we go in and we chop and drop that system, and all of the organic matter goes back into the soil, which helps build the soil. So over the last 4 years, the project's been running.
People ask me this all the time too. Chop and drop. We say that a million times. What actually is chop and drop?
So chop and drop is we plant plants that are not for food. We plant plants that are for biomass, and biomass is just organic matter that's in the system. So a lot of grasses and a lot of trees that grow very vigorously, that can take plenty cutting and still grow back, is what we put into the system. And when we do a chop and drop, it pretty much means that we chop the heads of the grass off, or the tops, and we drop it onto the soil. We go through and we chop all the branches of the trees that we've planted, and we drop that onto the soil. And as that breaks down and the fungal network picks up, it feeds everything within the system.
Mm-hmm. So you're covering the soil, you're literally chopping down the branches and extra limbs and things, and you are leaving it right on site where it lays, instead of carting it out and making extra work for yourself as well, and then having to cart back in nutritious soil.
Yes. So the scale that we do it at Walker's, it's a 300-acre site. The regeneration right now is happening on over 110 acres. Trying to truck stuff in and out is just really expensive. Yeah. So we have to grow everything on site that helps rebuild the soil.
Excellent. So while we're waiting for our next question from the audience, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about the planting patterns and things that you're using at Walker's Reserve. One of the permaculture principles regards planting in patterns and companion planting as well. So can you talk to us about some of the species that you're able to use in companion planting situations?
Sure. Well, the pattern that we follow at Walker's Reserve is that we create these alleyways, which are 12 feet wide. So there's a 12-foot walkway or driveway, and then there's a 12-foot bed. Mm-hmm. And this is pretty much on contour across the site. And in those 12-foot beds, on either edge of the bed, we plant vetiver grass or cuscus grass. And that, again, it has a very deep root. It produces a lot of biomass. It's for chop and drop. And then just inside of that cuscus, we plant Claricidia or quick stick, which is a very, very fast-growing tree that is a legume that will take nitrogen that's in the air in the soil and turn it into nitrates through an association of bacteria that live on the roots of those plants. And we chop and drop the Claricidia as well. And then down the middle of the 12-foot alleyway bed, we have a banana tree and then a fruit tree, a banana tree and a fruit tree. And the banana is really there to hold moisture in the system. And because it grows very quickly, it starts shading the system and it starts changing the microclimate.
Mhm.
So the banana is there really as kind of a mother tree for the little fruit tree that's growing next to it, and it starts sheltering it, and it starts providing it with shade. It changes the climate around where the fruit tree is so that it's cooler. And then as the fruit tree develops and grows over the next 5 to 6 years, eventually we'll remove the bananas, so the bananas will get shaded out of the system. But everything is planted in a way that it supports the growth of the eventual product, which is the fruit tree.
Right. Perfect. And we have another question from the audience. So this is from T. Jones. What have been the reactions of the Trinidadian public to your ecosystem? So that's a very good question. A lot of people look at permaculture sites and think that they're quite messy or not, what they're accustomed to seeing, an agricultural field neat and tidy in straight rows. So what have the Trinidadian public been thinking about your system?
So yes, the initial reaction when a lot of people come onto my farm is, wow, there's just a lot of bush over here. But as I give people a tour and as people take permaculture design courses on my site, they realize that every plant that we have in our system plays a role that is very important in making us self-sufficient. So even by the end of a 2-hour tour of our site, people then begin to realize how we're making a change in what we're doing. Permaculture systems tend to be very different from traditional agricultural systems because instead of just one plant being grown in a field, we have a diversity of plants. So once we walk people through the system so that they understand the different components and how the different components help us to be self-sufficient on our site, or at least get us towards self-sufficiency, people are a lot more enthusiastic about these sites. And a lot of comments that we get is, wow, we never really knew that there was a site like this in Trinidad. A lot of people go online and look at permaculture sites and they see them all over the world, but very few people in Trinidad realize that there is a 20-year-old site. And there are a few other 20-year-old sites in Trinidad that have been doing this work quietly. And we're there trying to make a difference as best we can.
Excellent. And there's a number of sites that people can visit in Barbados as well. There's so our Wired's Walkers Reserve project in St. Andrew. There is the Peg Farms, I guess they call it, Peg Farms in St. John, and there's also Cocoa Hill Forest in St. Joseph. We have a question coming in from Holly Bino, who I actually know happens to be just beginning her own permaculture acreage, I would call it. So she's asking, for water-scarce countries like Barbados, within the model and ethos of regenerative permaculture, how can one mitigate against the loss of crop integrity and harvest? So we are just entering into the second half, I would say, of a pretty major drought in Barbados, like most of the Caribbean islands. So Erle, can you take that one and run with it?
Sure. So pretty much the whole Caribbean does get quite a lot of rainfall during the rainy season. And the secret really is to try and conserve as much of that water that falls on our site from the rainy season to use during the dry season. So that even in a fairly bad rainy season, there is still a lot of water that falls on your site. And there are different ways of harvesting water. So most people will put a tank or build a cistern under their house where they'll catch water off their roofs. Mm-hmm. Some people will put in ponds, and that's what we've done here at Wasamaki. We've put in a lot of ponds. Wherever there's water flowing across your site, it tells you that you need to interrupt that flow and try and send that water into the water table below your land. So really the soil is probably the best place to store water. Mm-hmm. And the more organic matter that you can put in your soil is the more water that you can hold in your soil. So traditional or conventional agricultural systems tend to strip a lot of organic matter of their soil and then just rely on fertilizers to feed their plants. But in organic and permaculture systems, we really feed the soil instead of feeding the plant, so that you feed the soil with a lot of organic matter. The organic matter starts trapping a lot of moisture. And organic soils in drought conditions tend to be more resilient to droughts because they have that capacity to hold water. So anytime you're starting a permaculture project, the first thing that you have to do is look at water and where you can hold water on your site and where you can feed it into your soil and where you can trap it into your soil and where you can make the most use of it before it leaves your site. So anything that can hold water on your site is what you have to start designing into your site from the very start.
Perfect. So let's just say I have a brand new site. I'm brand new to water storage. Where do I start with that? What's my first step that I can take to start to create more water within my soil?
So there's a couple of steps. In permaculture, observation is really what we always ask people to start with. So try and be on your land when it's raining and look at where the water is flowing. Once you understand the pattern of water flowing across your site, you can then understand where you can interrupt that pattern to store it.
So we're literally
if you have a very steep gradient, so you're literally out there in the rain with an umbrella or your raincoat, walking around and looking at where the water is flowing, and that is the perfect situation to be observing when you have rain on your site, of where the water is and where you can hold it. And then when we teach permaculture design courses, we teach people where in their landscape they can interrupt it by putting swales. Swales are drains on contour. Certain areas may benefit from having swales and certain areas may not. So it's not something that you have to do. There are certain areas you could put ponds, and then there's certain areas that you can plant things like vetiver grass or cuscus grass on contour, and that'll slow the water that's flowing across your site, forcing it to infiltrate into the ground. And then you just cover your site.
Can you define what on contour means for the people out there who have not studied permaculture?
So on contour, a contour line on a map or on your site is the area that is the same height above sea level. So if your piece of land, the lowest part of your land is 10 feet above sea level and the highest part of your land is 50 feet above sea level, there are areas on your land that will all be at 45 feet above sea level. And by using things like an A-frame or a laser level, you can actually figure out these lines on your site. And then by digging a drain on that line that you've created that goes across your site, that's all at 45 feet above sea level, you can hold water in there without it flowing in any direction, and it'll sink into your ground.
Perfect. So like
into your water table.
A level area right across a slope of some sort, and then that's where you're trapping.
Yeah.
You're creating.
So pretty much, if you're walking, if you're walking across a slope, you should neither be going up or down on your slope. You're just walking straight across your slope. Okay. And if you have some way of creating that level across your slope so that you're not going either up or down, that would be where you'd create something to slow down the water that's going down your slope. So it could be that you plant grass. It could be that you put logs across on that level that will just slow water. You might be able to build things that are called check dams. Or you can dig something that's called a swale, which is just a drain that's dug on contour.
Okay.
Or you can just heavily mulch your soil, and that will also hold water from moving in any direction.
Absolutely. I'd say first step is mulch and then store your water. So, okay, so we have another question coming in from Dominique Mark, and Dominique is actually one of our most recent CPRI PDC graduates. So Dominique is asking, how do you see the monocrop agriculture industry transitioning over to permaculture or more regenerative practices here in the Caribbean? That's an excellent question. So this is framing on our theme of the day is, why do we need it and where do we get started? But how do we see that big agricultural industry transitioning?
So one of the issues with monocrop agriculture is that when you plant a lot of one plant in one area, it sends out signals, it sends out smells that tells all the pests in the area, here I am. And that attracts pests to come very quickly into that area. So wherever you are practicing monocrop agriculture, where you're just planting one plant, it immediately sends out the signal that there is something wrong in this area, come and fix the area, to nature. Because in nature, things are not grown in monocrops. Things grow as a vast diversity of things. So
Exactly.
that
Forest.
in natural systems, if you go into any natural system, most 99% of the time, probably you won't find just one plant growing in there. You'll find many different plants. And pests really help to keep that balance in place of many different things, because many different plants are harvesting many different things in the soil, providing fruit at many different times, providing flowers at many different times. So they are supporting that whole ecosystem by having diversity in it. When you put in a monocrop, it's just one plant that you put in that's there for a certain amount of time. Recently, I've been finding out information that a monocrop tends to mimic a system that's dying in natural systems, because it's just one level, and that system tends to dry out very quickly versus diverse systems that tend to hold moisture within them. So whenever systems are dying out in nature, things come into those systems to restart the cycle by taking down the trees, eating up everything in there. So that monocrop agriculture tends to mimic systems that are dying in nature, and that tends to bring a lot of pests into your system. And in monocrop systems, a lot of how we deal with pests is spraying pesticides. Pesticides are, even the safest ones are expensive, and they're not something that you want your children to be exposed to. It's not something you want your husband to be exposed to, or your wife, or anyone in your family to be exposed to. And if you've looked at how to correctly spray pesticides, you have to pretty much be wearing a hazmat suit when you're doing it. And most people in the Caribbean can't do that. They'd probably die of heat. And a lot of them don't, so that they're always exposing themselves. So this is an issue. And again, the whole idea of all our pesticides and herbicides are imported is that in a situation like now, where we have a pandemic and a lot of industries are slowing down, a lot of countries that are producing a lot of these pesticides may actually hold on to them for their own agriculture, that they don't want to ship them to us. Or people might be sick that are working in those industries that they're not producing as much. So that when we are totally reliant on all these products out there that are being imported into our country, we run the risk of, if we're overly reliant on them, if they suddenly stop coming in, our whole food system will crash, which has happened in places like Cuba. So using regenerative or permaculture systems, you start uncoupling yourself from these products that come from all over the world, and you start using more systems that are naturally based, or that you can create from things that you have on site or on island. And that is the way that I think things will move as
Absolutely. Post-pandemic.
systems collapse. Yes, post-pandemic, we don't know what the financial system will be like. Can we even afford at that point to be bringing in all this stuff?
Exactly.
With jobs or industries that have closed down. So in those situations, you then have to rely on all your home remedies that your grandmother knew about, and planting things that your grandmother knew like to be planted next to each other, and that supported each other instead of some of these systems. And more people just need to be planting food just around their houses, so that we don't have to have these huge areas producing food when everyone else is producing food around their house.
Absolutely. So guys, if you're just joining us now, our topic today is Permaculture Will Change Our Future. We're joined by thought leader Earl Rahaman Noronha from Wasamaki Ecosystems in Trinidad. We're taking live questions from the audience. So if you would like to type something in the discussion below this Facebook feed, we can attend to your questions. So our next question is coming in from Ria Jilks. How would permaculture practices be applied to growing at home in pots? So permaculture is not just for large farms. What soil mix would be best? I want to grow herbs, greens, vegetables, etc. It's all possible on your patio in pots.
Right. So to grow potted plants successfully, really, you need a good soil mix. A good soil mix is something that will hold water but not hold too much water. It'll allow a certain amount of air in, but won't dry out very quickly. So a good soil mix tends to have a certain amount of compost or organic manure in it, mature manure. It tends to have clay type soils as well as sand. So it's kind of like a loam. And different plants like different soil conditions, so that sometimes you have to research. Some plants may like more sandy soil, some plants may like more clay soil, and some plants may like being out in the full sun, some plants might like being in partial shade. So when you have a yard, and this is what we teach people about in permaculture design, is aware of what's happening in your yard. Where does the sun rise? Where does the sun set? Which way does the wind blow in from? Which way does the rain blow in from? And then you put your pots accordingly and you plant all your different things in there. And again, by planting a variety of different things, you have a variety of different smells coming out from those potted plants. And then that tends to confuse pests as well, so that most pests don't see your plant, they smell your plant. So that by having many different smells in your backyard or your front yard or your driveway, all in pots, it confuses the pests and it makes it more likely that you will have more success. If you don't want to use pesticides, you should be out there looking at your plants very often, so that sometimes you'll notice that there's eggs on your plants, or you'll notice there's little caterpillars. You can pick them off at that point. And always put your plants somewhere where the pattern that you follow every day allows you to look at your plants very often. Don't put them in a corner somewhere where you'll forget about them. All right, put them right by where you go all the time, because that is the most successful area that you will grow your plants in. Most people have tried potted plants and say they fail. And when you ask them to analyze the pattern of how they move around their property, they tend to put those plants in places that they just don't go a lot. And in the end, the plants dry out or something comes and eats them because they've never looked at them. All right, so it's very important, and that's what we teach people in permaculture design, is how do you analyze your own pattern, and then how do you use that pattern to maximize the benefits of everything else that you want to do regeneratively on your site.
Absolutely, and the permaculture design course is designed for everyone, home scale right through to full scale agricultural production. The principles are applicable to everyone. So our next question is from Sonia Peter. She is wondering how pollinators are integrated within your system, and how has the fauna and diversity regenerated within your developing forest. So I think she's talking about your Wasamaki forest in relation to the pollinators there.
So yes, pollinators play a huge part in Wasamaki. Most people, when they think of pollinators, just think of honeybees. But pollinators in tropical systems can be moths, they can be flies, they can be butterflies, they can be hummingbirds, they can be anything that visits a flower. So at Wasamaki here, because we have planted such a diversity of plants, we have a lot of different pollinators in our system. We recently started a project that's on iNaturalist, where we're logging all the different, taking pictures of all the different, anything that's alive on our site and putting it up there for people all over the world to identify what we have within our system that weren't here 20 years ago. All of them play a role. One of the important pollinators that we're looking at now is the stingless bees, which are indigenous to Trinidad. Stingless bees, as you say, are stingless. They have no stingers. You can work with them without them attacking you. It's great working with them. They make a very medicinal honey. And that is something that we're working on right now, is introducing the indigenous stingless bees back into the environment around us, and encouraging any hives that we find to stay, and what can we plant to feed them. So that, yes, pollinators are very important, and they pollinate all the fruit and flowers and everything else that's really important in our systems.
Absolutely, and having the diversity within the system as well helps, because that means you're attracting a huge variety of different pollinators as well. So you're creating diversity in your flora and diversity in your fauna. That's great.
Yes, and one of the issues that I'd just like to bring up is that we have tried honeybees over here, and we've kept losing our hives. And the reason for that is some of our neighbors still use a lot of pesticides. And even though I have 30 acres of forest over here, my honeybees tend to forage further, and they come back contaminated and they die in the hives. So that we've lost all our honeybee hives, but the indigenous stingless bees don't range as far. So that within the 30 acres that we have over here, we've been able to successfully maintain them over here. And even though they don't produce as much honey, the honey that they produce is more valuable. So in the long term, it's just something that we can do until we can maybe convince our neighbors to use less pesticides, which is
Yeah,
something we're working on.
it's a whole different argument for a whole different time. We could have a whole session just on the use of pesticides and what it does to biodiversity and what it does to everything else around us, even our humans, the flora, the fauna, everything. Our next question coming in is from Sean. Do you need to use conventional fertilizers, or is this chop and drop method providing enough?
So I'll talk to you about my experience from a couple of different sites. So my own farm at Wasamaki, cut flowers are our main income, and we still use a certain amount of conventional fertilizer on those crops. We don't use any pesticides, we don't use any herbicides. And the reason we use conventional fertilizer is that we have not been able to access manure in as much quantities or as cheaply as we need to put into the system. Recently, I took a workshop on syntropy, which is syntropic agriculture, which is chop and drop almost on steroids. And that system, they claim, will feed the entire system without bringing in external materials. And we are now testing out that system. It requires you to leave certain areas on your site between your beds for certain grasses and trees to grow. And they say that once you have the correct mix, you can actually eliminate completely all your conventional fertilizers. And that is the direction that I am going towards now, is that we are setting up a lot more syntropic beds on my farm right now. And it's something that we'll talk more about in a different webinar probably. Mm-hmm. And we will have workshops on that at CPRI and at Wasamaki, hopefully in August, if this virus is under control by then, or if not, then later next year. But those systems do claim, and I have seen them working in Australia, where they don't need any new inputs. They will produce everything on their own.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So our next question is actually from Victoria. She wants to hear more about the ponds that you installed and how did you accomplish this? So where did you start when you moved to the property?
So my site is entirely clay, which is great for building ponds in. It's terrible to grow things in because during the dry season, it's like concrete. And then during the rainy season, it's like a swamp. Mm-hmm. But because it's clay, all I need to do is dig a hole and it'll fill with water and I can call it a pond. So over the last 20 years, we've brought in heavy equipment and we've designed ponds on our site where we've put in close to 20 ponds now. The biggest ponds are probably about 100 feet by 100 feet, and the smallest ones may be 10 feet by 20 feet. They're all set up in different areas to harvest water that would otherwise flow off my land. So that during the rainy season, when my neighbor's farm has water gushing off his land within 2 days of the rain starting, my farm is actually absorbing all that water for up to 2 months before it then starts flowing off site. So that we've created systems that just encourage water and encourage it to stay in your system. Now, if you don't have clay, then you run into problems of where you can dig your ponds. People in those situations will put in liners, or they will build concrete storage areas. But again, you really have to analyze what your soils are like before you dig a pond and see if they'll hold water. If they hold water, great, you just need to dig the holes. When you're digging ponds that are more than a couple of feet above ground that you need to build dams on, we recommend that you talk to a engineer to get advice on that. Just don't go and dig a huge pond and put up a huge dam and then it blows out during the rainy season. Always there. The Ministry of Agriculture will normally have someone that can come and talk to you about agricultural ponds. And also we always recommend talking to some type of engineer to help you design large ponds. Small ponds are quite easy to do. And if you don't have clay, you can use liners. Some people even use sheets of plastic.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This has been really great. The audience has been really great. We really appreciate you joining us from Trinidad, Erle. We are going to be hosting this webinar on a bi-weekly basis. So every Tuesday and Thursday, Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and Thursdays at 11 a.m., Wired will be hosting this in this space on Facebook. So you can join us at any point. We will have a variety of topics, which you can check on our Facebook page. As we have our topics lined up, we will let you know, and feel free to join in at any point. We're also recording these sessions, so you can watch them live after the fact. And we will put a lot of the links to things that we've talked about, or examples, and documents, things that we can give you as tips and tricks on our Facebook page and our Instagram. So I encourage you all to follow us and like us on Facebook, Instagram, that our handles would be Wired Barbados, CPRI Barbados, and Erle's site at Wasamaki Ecosystems. I believe you go by Wasamaki Permaculture, Erle. And as Erle said, we do a number of things. So we host internships and courses at Wired's Walker's Reserve site in Barbados. Erle also hosts internships and courses at his site in Trinidad. So we encourage everyone to just get involved, take action, do something small. As you're all at home and you're all able to watch this, a little bit of learning never always goes a very long way. So try and wash your hands and plant some seeds. And if you follow along, hopefully we give you all the knowledge and information and just general interesting topics to think about and talk about in this time when we're all stuck at home and looking for something and some way to come out of this with a positive outlook. Erle, any last thoughts or anything to say to the permaculture aspirers out there?
Just go and try something. That's my advice. Don't get tied up on not having things around you that you can use. There's plenty of stuff around you. Even if there's no soil, you can start making your own soil. There's so much information out there. Everything starts with the first step. All right. So when I started Wasamaki, I had no knowledge at all of how to run a 30-acre farm. Mm-hmm. And it's one step at a time. And that's what you need to do. Just start with your first step. Anything regenerative, anything sustainable, and just go from there. And you'll be successful.
Little 2x4 front yard, there's a step that you can take today. And like I said, we'll be posting some more tips and tricks as time goes by. We will also be hosting this on Wired's YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to watch this after the fact, you can log into the Wired's YouTube channel. Links will be available on Facebook and Instagram. And hope that everybody has enjoyed. Please tune in again on Thursday at 11 a.m. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us, Erle. It's been great to see you.
Great. You guys have a good day. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.